The old alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., its gentle hum filling the quiet apartment. Linda Rodriguez stretched her tired arms and quickly silenced it, not wanting to wake her 3 sleeping children in the next room. The morning darkness wrapped around her like a familiar blanket as she tiptoed to the bathroom, carefully avoiding the creaky floorboard near the hallway. A dance she had perfected over the years. Through the thin walls of their modest apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, she could hear the distant rumble of early morning traffic. The sound reminded her of the long day ahead, but she pushed away the exhaustion with thoughts of her children's smiling faces. The bathroom mirror revealed dark circles under her eyes, battle scars of countless double shifts and sleepless nights spent worrying about bills. In the kitchen, Linda started her morning ritual. The coffee maker gurgled to life. A gift from her oldest son Alex, who had saved up his allowance from helping neighbors with their gardens. The thought made her smile, even as she felt a familiar pang in her heart. At 15, Alex was growing up too fast, shouldering responsibilities no teenager should have to bear. She pulled out 3 lunch bags from the cabinet, each decorated with different stickers: superheroes for Tommy, butterflies for Rosa, and plain blue for Alex. The sight of the empty bags made her stomach knot. Yesterday's notice from the school about unpaid lunch fees lay crumpled in her purse, the numbers burning in her memory: $342.87 overdue. Linda opened the refrigerator, its light casting a harsh glow on the sparse contents inside. She had stretched this week's groceries as far as they could go, but it wasn't enough. Making lunches had become a daily puzzle: how to make something from almost nothing, how to keep her children fed without letting them know just how tight things were. As she spread peanut butter on the last slices of bread, her mind wandered to the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. The electric company's final notice glared at her in angry red letters, and the rent was due in 10 days. Her 2 jobs, morning shifts at the grocery store and afternoon waitressing at Jerry's Diner, barely covered the basics, and with prices climbing higher every month, she was falling behind. The sound of shuffling feet made her quickly wipe away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. Alex stood in the doorway, already dressed for school, his dark hair messy from sleep. "Mom, you don't have to make my lunch," he said softly, just like he had been saying every morning lately. "I'm not really hungry during lunch anyway." Linda's heart squeezed tight in her chest. She knew what he was doing, trying to help in the only way he could. She had noticed how his clothes hung a little looser lately, how he would claim he had big breakfasts at his friend's house before school. Her bright, caring boy was going hungry to save money, to make sure his younger siblings had enough to eat. "Nonsense," she said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice as she continued making his sandwich. "You're a growing boy. Besides, I got extra hours at the diner this week." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bear the thought of him sacrificing his own meals. She had already picked up every extra shift available, but it still wasn't enough. The morning continued its usual rush, getting Tommy and Rosa up, dressed, and ready for school. Rosa complained about her tangled hair, while Tommy couldn't find his favorite action figure. Through it all, Linda maintained her calm exterior, even as her mind raced with calculations and worry. She had exactly $27.43 in her checking account, and payday was still 4 days away. As she helped Tommy tie his shoelaces, she noticed they were wearing thin at the edges. Another expense she would have to figure out soon. But when he looked up at her with his gap-toothed smile, proudly showing her how he could almost do it himself now, she pushed the worry aside and celebrated his small victory. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges as Linda hurried her children out the door. Alex carried Rose's backpack along with his own, while Tommy chatted excitedly about his upcoming science project. Looking at them, her beautiful, resilient children, Linda felt both fierce pride and crushing responsibility. Standing at the bus stop, she straightened Tommy's collar and smoothed Rose's hair one last time. As the yellow school bus approached, her children hugged her goodbye. Alex was the last to board, and the look he gave her, too understanding, too adult, made her heart ache. She watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, then checked her watch. 20 minutes to get to her first job of the day. Walking quickly toward the grocery store, Linda's mind was already racing through possible solutions. Maybe she could pick up some cleaning jobs on the weekends, or perhaps the diner would let her work extra hours in the kitchen. There had to be a way to make this work. She wouldn't let her children down. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her shoulders, but Linda straightened her back and quickened her pace. Tomorrow would be another early morning, another day of stretched dollars and worried smiles. But for now, she had work to do, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she held onto a sliver of hope that somehow things would get better. The afternoon sun streamed through the wide windows of Jerry's diner, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Linda's feet ached as she moved between tables, carrying plates of burgers and refilling coffee cups. The lunch rush had been particularly busy, and she was grateful for the extra tips, even if each step made her worn-out shoes feel like they were filled with lead. The diner sat just 2 blocks away from Pine Valley Studios, which meant they occasionally got customers from film crews working nearby. Most days, Linda was too focused on keeping orders straight and tables clean to pay much attention to who came through the doors. Today was no different. Her mind was stuck on the parent-teacher conference scheduled for next week, where she'd have to somehow explain the growing lunch debt. The bell above the door chimed softly around 3 p.m. during the quiet lull between lunch and dinner. Linda barely glanced up as she wiped down the counter, noting only that someone had taken a seat in booth 7, her section. She grabbed a menu and her order pad, plastering on her best professional smile despite her exhaustion. The customer sat with his back to the wall, wearing a well-worn motorcycle jacket and reading what looked like a thick script. His long dark hair partially covered his face as he studied the pages intently. "Welcome to Jerry's," Linda said, setting down a menu. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" He looked up with kind eyes and nodded. "Coffee would be great, thanks." His voice was soft and gentle, carrying none of the impatience she often dealt with from customers. Linda hurried to grab the coffee pot, her mind already drifting back to her worries. She had exactly 3 hours until she needed to leave for Tommy's parent-teacher conference, and she still hadn't figured out what to tell his teacher about the lunch situation. As she poured the coffee, her hands trembled slightly. They always did that now, after long shifts and too little sleep. A splash of hot coffee missed the cup, landing on the script pages spread across the table. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," Linda exclaimed, frantically reaching for napkins. The stress of the past few weeks, the constant worry about money, and now this mistake, it all suddenly felt overwhelming. To her horror, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure as she dabbed at the coffee stain. "I'll pay for the script, I'm so sorry, Her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together tightly, willing herself not to break down in front of a customer. "Hey, it's okay," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The script's just a copy, and coffee stains give it character." He moved the papers aside and looked at her with genuine concern. It was then that Linda finally really looked at him, and recognition slowly dawned. She was apologizing to Keanu Reeves. Her eyes widened slightly, but years of living in Los Angeles had taught her to maintain her professional demeanor around celebrities. Still, there was something about his kind expression that made her usual defenses crumble. "I'm sorry," she said again, this time apologizing for more than just the coffee. "It's been a long day." "Would you like to sit down for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. Linda glanced around the nearly empty diner. Only 2 other tables were occupied, and both had been served their meals. She should say no. She should maintain professional boundaries. But something in his genuine concern made her pause. "Just for a minute," she found herself saying, sliding into the booth. Her feet thanked her for the brief respite. "Rough day?" he asked, pushing the coffee-stained script aside. His question was simple, but his tone carried real interest, not just polite small talk. Linda stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "Rough month," she admitted quietly. "Actually, rough year." She didn't know why she was being honest with a stranger, even if he was a famous one. Maybe it was because he seemed to actually listen, or maybe she had just been carrying the weight alone for too long. "I have 3 kids," she found herself continuing. "Their father left 2 years ago, and lately, everything just keeps getting more expensive. The school sent another notice about lunch payments, and She stopped, realizing she was oversharing. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear all this. Can I get you something to eat?" But Keanu didn't reach for the menu. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "How much is the lunch debt?" he asked quietly. Linda shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I wasn't trying to. I wasn't asking for." She stood up abruptly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Let me get you a fresh cup of coffee." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time," he said softly. "Sometimes we're meant to hear someone's story." She looked back at him, surprised by the simple wisdom in his words. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two humans connecting in an unexpected moment of understanding. Then the kitchen bell rang, signaling an order was ready, and Linda quickly wiped her eyes. "Thank you for listening," she said sincerely. "Now, what can I get you for lunch?" As she walked away to check on her other tables, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in a while, a small lightening of the weight she carried. Sometimes she realized just being truly heard could make a difference. She had no way of knowing that this chance encounter was about to change everything, but for now, the simple act of sharing her burden had given her the strength to face the rest of her day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jerry's diner's windows as Linda found herself sitting across from Keanu Reeves again. She had tried to keep working to maintain professional distance, but he had gently insisted she take another break when the diner quieted down. Now, wrapped in the warm glow of sunset, the small booth felt like a safe haven from the world's pressures. "My kids don't even know how bad things are," Linda admitted, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. The ceramic was warm against her palms, grounding her in the moment. "I try to shield them from it, you know. But Alex, he's my oldest. He figures things out. He's too smart for his own good sometimes." Keanu nodded, his eyes carrying a depth of understanding that made Linda feel less alone. "Kids often understand more than we think," he said softly. "They see the little things, feel the weight their parents carry." "Yesterday," Linda continued, surprising herself with how easily the words flowed, "I found out he's been skipping lunch at school. He told his siblings he's joining some study group, but I know the truth. He's trying to help by eating less, making sure his brother and sister have enough." Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a sip of coffee to steady herself. "That must be hard to watch," Keanu said, his voice gentle but free of pity. "Seeing your child take on adult worries." Linda nodded, blinking back tears. "The hardest part is that I'm trying everything I can. I work 2 jobs, I budget every penny, I've cut every expense I can think of. But prices keep rising, and with 3 growing kids." She shook her head, staring into her coffee cup. "Sometimes it feels like I'm swimming against a current that keeps getting stronger." "I understand more than you might think," Keanu said after a moment. He shifted in his seat, his expression becoming more personal, less like the movie star everyone knew. "My sister had leukemia when I was younger. I watched my family struggle with medical bills, saw how hard it was on everyone. Sometimes the systems we have in place make it so hard for families to just live." His honesty surprised her, made her look up and really see him, not the famous actor, but just another human who understood struggle and pain. "How did your family get through it?" she asked quietly. "One day at a time," he answered, a small smile touching his lips. "And with help from others. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing we can do, especially when we're carrying responsibility for others." Linda's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I've never been good at asking for help," she admitted. "After my husband left, I promised myself I'd never have to depend on anyone else again. I wanted to prove I could do it all on my own." "Being strong doesn't mean being alone," Keanu said softly. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others in." Just then, the kitchen door swung open and the cook called out, "Linda, your order for table 4 is up." She started to rise, but Keanu gently raised a hand. "Before you go, would you tell me more about your kids? What are their dreams? What makes them light up?" Linda settled back into her seat, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time that day. "Well, Tommy, he's my youngest. He wants to be a scientist. He's always doing these little experiments in the kitchen. Last week, he tried to prove that plants grow better if you sing to them." She laughed softly at the memory. "Rosa, she's my middle child. She's the artist of the family. She draws these incredible pictures, turns every scrap of paper into something beautiful." As she spoke about her children, her whole demeanor changed. The worry lines around her eyes softened, replaced by the proud glow of a mother's love. And Alex, her voice grew softer, he wants to be a doctor. He volunteers at the local animal shelter on weekends, says he wants to help those who can't help themselves. He's got such a big heart. Keanu listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about each child. He smiled at the story of Tommy's failed attempt to make a volcano in the bathtub and nodded appreciatively when Linda described Rose's latest art project, a family portrait made entirely from recycled materials. "They sound like amazing kids," he said finally. "You've done an incredible job raising them." Linda felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't from sadness or frustration. "They are amazing," she agreed. "They're what keeps me going, even on the hardest days." She paused, gathering her courage to voice her deepest fear. "I just worry that I'm letting them down, that they deserve so much more than I can give them." "From what you've told me," Keanu said, his voice firm but kind, "you're giving them the most important things: love, values, the courage to care for others even when times are tough. Those are gifts that last a lifetime." The diner's bell chimed as new customers walked in, pulling Linda back to reality. She stood up, straightening her apron. "Thank you," she said simply, but the words carried the weight of deep gratitude, not just for listening, but for seeing her, for treating her story as something worthy of being heard. As she walked away to greet the new customers, she felt different somehow. The weight of her struggles hadn't magically disappeared, but sharing them had made them feel a little lighter. She didn't notice Keanu pulling out his phone, didn't see him beginning to type out messages that would set bigger changes in motion. For now, she just felt a small spark of hope, like maybe the universe really did sometimes put people in the right place at the right time. After leaving Jerry's diner, Keanu sat on his parked motorcycle for a long moment, Linda's story weighing heavily on his mind. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but he barely noticed the beautiful sunset. His hands rested on the handlebars as memories of his own family's struggles flooded back, the tight budgets, the worried conversations behind closed doors, the determined smile on his mother's face even during the hardest times. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hey David," he said when his longtime production assistant answered. "Remember that education initiative we talked about last month? I think I found where we need to start." Over the next hour, Keanu remained in the parking lot, making call after call. His voice grew more animated as pieces of his plan began falling into place. David connected him with the school district's superintendent, who initially seemed skeptical about receiving a call from a Hollywood actor, but quickly warmed to the conversation. "It's not just about one family," Keanu explained, pacing beside his motorcycle. "Linda's story, it's happening all over the city. Kids skipping meals, parents working multiple jobs, families falling behind because of a system that doesn't work for everyone." He paused, watching a young mother walk past with two children, their backpacks almost as big as they were. "We need to do something that lasts." The superintendent shared some sobering statistics. Hundreds of families in the district were struggling with lunch debt, and the numbers were growing every month. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about dignity, about children being able to focus on learning instead of hunger, about parents not having to choose between paying bills and feeding their kids. As the sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on, Keanu's plan took shape. He reached out to his financial advisor, discussing the logistics of setting up a foundation. "I want it to be sustainable," he insisted, "not just a one-time fix. These families need ongoing support." The next call was to his publicity team, though his request surprised them. "No press releases," he said firmly. "No photos, no social media announcements. This isn't about publicity." He remembered the quiet dignity in Linda's voice as she spoke about her children, how she hadn't asked for help even when sharing her struggles. This needed to be handled with the same respect. Around 9 p.m., his phone rang. It was his sister. She listened as he explained what he was planning, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "You're thinking about Mom, aren't you?" she asked softly. "About how hard she worked to keep things normal for us?" "Yeah," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "And about all the other mothers out there doing the same thing right now. One job, two jobs, whatever it takes, but sometimes it's just not enough, not with the way things are set up." His sister was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know what Mom would say about this." Keanu smiled, remembering their mother's favorite phrase, "Small acts of kindness can create big waves of change." The next morning, Keanu arrived early at the production office. His team had worked through the night, preparing documents and making arrangements. As they gathered around the conference table, he spread out the papers detailing their plan. Phase 1 is immediate relief, he explained, pointing to the figures. We clear the existing lunch debt for every family in the district. But that's just the beginning. He flipped to the next page, revealing a longer-term strategy. Phase 2 is prevention. We set up a sustainable fund that ensures no child in this district ever has to worry about lunch money again. His team listened intently as he outlined the details. One of them spoke up. "This is going to take a lot of coordination with the school district, the local government." "Then let's get started," Keanu replied simply. "These kids can't wait." Throughout the day, the plan evolved and expanded. Someone suggested partnering with local businesses to create a matching donation program. Another team member proposed including nutrition education and cooking classes for families wanting to learn about budget-friendly meal planning. By late afternoon, Keanu sat back in his chair, surrounded by notes and documents. The simple act of kindness he'd initially envisioned had grown into something bigger, something that could potentially change hundreds of lives. But at the heart of it all was still the image of Linda in that diner booth, speaking about her children with such love and worry. As he prepared to leave the office, his assistant handed him one final document, the official registration for the Lunch for All Foundation. "Are you sure you don't want your name attached to this?" she asked. Keanu shook his head, thinking of Linda's quiet strength, of all the parents out there doing their best against impossible odds. "It's not about me," he said softly. "It's about making sure every kid can focus on being a kid instead of worrying about their next meal." He signed the papers with a steady hand, then stood up, ready to put the plan into action. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of implementation, of turning ideas into reality. But for now, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes a chance encounter in a diner could lead to something extraordinary. After leaving Jerry's diner, Keanu sat on his parked motorcycle for a long moment, Linda's story weighing heavily on his mind. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but he barely noticed the beautiful sunset. His hands rested on the handlebars as memories of his own family's struggles flooded back, the tight budgets, the worried conversations behind closed doors, the determined smile on his mother's face, even during the hardest times. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hey, David," he said when his longtime production assistant answered. "Remember that education initiative we talked about last month? I think I've found where we need to start." Over the next hour, Keanu remained in the parking lot, making call after call. His voice grew more animated as pieces of his plan began falling into place. David connected him with the school district's superintendent, who initially seemed skeptical about receiving a call from a Hollywood actor, but quickly warmed to the conversation. "It's not just about one family," Keanu explained, pacing beside his motorcycle. "Linda's story, it's happening all over the city. Kids skipping meals, parents working multiple jobs, families falling behind because of a system that doesn't work for everyone." He paused, watching a young mother walk past with 2 children, their backpacks almost as big as they were. "We need to do something that lasts." The superintendent shared some sobering statistics. Hundreds of families in the district were struggling with lunch debt, and the numbers were growing every month. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about dignity, about children being able to focus on learning instead of hunger, about parents not having to choose between paying bills and feeding their kids. As the sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on, Keanu's plan took shape. He reached out to his financial advisor, discussing the logistics of setting up a foundation. "I want it to be sustainable," he insisted, "not just a one-time fix. These families need ongoing support." The next call was to his publicity team, though his request surprised them. "No press releases," he said firmly. "No photos, no social media announcements. This isn't about publicity." He remembered the quiet dignity in Linda's voice as she spoke about her children, how she hadn't asked for help even when sharing her struggles. This needed to be handled with the same respect. Around 9 p.m., his phone rang. It was his sister. She listened as he explained what he was planning, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "You're thinking about Mom, aren't you?" she asked softly. about how hard she worked to keep things normal for us. Yeah, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. And about all the other mothers out there doing the same thing right now. 1 job, 2 jobs, whatever it takes, but sometimes it's just not enough, not with the way things are set up. His sister was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know what Mom would say about this." Keanu smiled, remembering their mother's favorite phrase, "Small acts of kindness can create big waves of change." The next morning, Keanu arrived early at the production office. His team had worked through the night, preparing documents and making arrangements. As they gathered around the conference table, he spread out the papers detailing their plan. Phase 1 is immediate relief, he explained, pointing to the figures. We clear the existing lunch debt for every family in the district. But that's just the beginning. He flipped to the next page, revealing a longer-term strategy. Phase 2 is prevention. We set up a sustainable fund that ensures no child in this district ever has to worry about lunch money again. His team listened intently as he outlined the details. One of them spoke up, "This is going to take a lot of coordination with the school district, the local government." "Then let's get started," Keanu replied simply. "These kids can't wait." Throughout the day, the plan evolved and expanded. Someone suggested partnering with local businesses to create a matching donation program. Another team member proposed including nutrition education and cooking classes for families wanting to learn about budget-friendly meal planning. By late afternoon, Keanu sat back in his chair, surrounded by notes and documents. The simple act of kindness he'd initially envisioned had grown into something bigger, something that could potentially change hundreds of lives. But at the heart of it all was still the image of Linda in that diner booth, speaking about her children with such love and worry. As he prepared to leave the office, his assistant handed him one final document, the official registration for the Lunch for All Foundation. "Are you sure you don't want your name attached to this?" she asked. Keanu shook his head, thinking of Linda's quiet strength, of all the parents out there doing their best against impossible odds. "It's not about me," he said softly. "It's about making sure every kid can focus on being a kid instead of worrying about their next meal." He signed the papers with a steady hand, then stood up, ready to put the plan into action. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of implementation, of turning ideas into reality. But for now, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes a chance encounter in a diner could lead to something extraordinary. Linda's hands trembled as she read the message again. The school principal wanted to meet with her first thing in the morning, before her grocery store shift. Her stomach twisted into knots as she imagined what this could mean. Had they decided to take action about the unpaid lunch fees? Would her children face consequences because of her struggles? The tiny apartment kitchen felt even smaller than usual as she paced back and forth, the notification on her phone glowing accusingly. Through the thin walls, she could hear Tommy practicing his multiplication tables, his voice carrying a cheerful determination that made her heart ache. How could she tell him and his siblings if things got worse? That night, sleep proved impossible. Linda lay awake, listening to the gentle breathing of her children in the next room, her mind racing through possibilities. She could try to get an advance on her paycheck, or maybe sell some of her mother's old jewelry. The thought made her chest tight. Those pieces were all she had left of her mom, but she'd do anything to protect her kids. Morning came too quickly, the sky still dark as Linda got dressed in her best clothes, a simple blouse and her one pair of dress pants, kept carefully pressed for important occasions. Alex was already up, making breakfast for his siblings. "Mom," he called softly as she grabbed her purse. "Everything okay?" Linda forced a smile. "Just a meeting at school, honey. Nothing to worry about." But Alex's eyes, too wise for his 14 years, told her he wasn't convinced. The school halls were quiet when she arrived, most students still not due for another hour. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum floors as she made her way to the principal's office. Each step felt heavier than the last. The secretary greeted her with an unusually bright smile and led her straight to the conference room. Linda's confusion grew when she saw not just the principal, but several other people seated around the large table. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized one of them, Keanu Reeves, looking exactly as he had in the diner, minus the motorcycle jacket. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the principal began, standing to greet her. "Please have a seat. We have something important to discuss." Linda sank into the offered chair, her legs feeling weak. Keanu caught her eye and gave her a gentle, reassuring nod. The principal continued speaking, but the words seemed to come from far away as Linda tried to process what was happening. Complete clearance of all lunch debt. New district-wide program. Ensuring no child goes hungry. The words slowly began to make sense, and Linda's hand flew to her mouth as she understood. Keanu spoke next, his voice carrying the same gentle kindness she remembered from the diner. After our conversation, he explained, I couldn't stop thinking about how many families must be facing similar challenges. So we've created a program that will help not just your family, but every family in the district who's struggling with lunch payments. The principal slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents showing that not only had her children's lunch debt been cleared, but a new system was being implemented to ensure all students would receive meals regardless of their ability to pay. This isn't charity, Keanu added softly, noting Linda's overwhelmed expression. This is community. This is how things should be, everyone looking out for each other. Tears spilled down Linda's cheeks as she read through the papers. Her hands shook so badly she could hardly hold them. I don't know what to say, she whispered. The school nutritionist, a warm-faced woman, spoke up. You don't need to say anything, but we would love your help in reaching other families who might be hesitant to ask for assistance. Your experience could help us make this program work better for everyone. Linda nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of Alex secretly skipping meals to help his siblings, of Tommy's science projects done with household items because she couldn't afford proper supplies, of Rose's artwork created on the backs of old receipts because new paper was a luxury they couldn't afford. There's more, the principal said, pulling out another set of papers. We've established a special fund for school supplies and activity fees. Every child should have the opportunity to participate fully in their education, don't you agree? Linda's vision blurred with tears as she thought of all the permission slips she had to deny, all the field trips and activities her children had missed because she couldn't afford the fees. Why? She managed to ask, looking at Keanu. Why do all this? He smiled, that same gentle smile from the diner. Because your story reminded me of something important, that sometimes the biggest changes start with just listening to someone's story and thinking, what if we could make this better? As the meeting continued, Linda learned more about the program. It wasn't just about free lunches, it was about dignity, about creating a system where no child would feel different or left out because of their family's financial situation. When she finally left the school, the morning sun was bright in the sky. She stood on the steps for a moment, letting the warmth wash over her face. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe freely. The weight that had been crushing her for so long felt lighter. Her phone buzzed, a text from Alex asking if everything was okay. Linda smiled through her tears as she typed back. Everything is more than okay, sweetheart. Wait until I tell you about the changes coming to school. As she walked to her car, she heard Keanu's motorcycle start up behind the school. By the time she turned around, he was gone. No cameras, no publicity, no fanfare. Just a simple act of kindness that would ripple out to touch hundreds of lives. That evening, as Linda watched her children do their homework at the kitchen table, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, genuine peace on their faces. No more hidden hunger, no more silent sacrifices. Just kids being kids, exactly as it should be. Word spread through the community like a gentle wave, touching one family after another. It started small, whispered conversations at school pickup, quiet tears of relief in the cafeteria office, hesitant phone calls to the school asking if the rumors were true. The story of mysterious lunch debt disappearing and a new program ensuring no child would go hungry seemed almost too good to believe. Linda found herself at the heart of it all, though she hadn't planned it that way. It began with a mother approaching her in the grocery store where she worked, recognizing her from school drop-offs. The woman's eyes were red from crying. Is it true? She whispered, clutching a crumpled lunch bill notice. They said you might know about the program. Linda gentled stocked shelves as she explained everything, watching relief wash over the other mother's face. That conversation led to another and another. Soon, she was spending her breaks helping other parents fill out the simple forms for the new lunch program. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, though they never managed to track down the mysterious benefactor. The headline read, Anonymous donor launches revolutionary school lunch program. Linda smiled when she read it, knowing the truth but honoring Keanu's wish for privacy. The impact rippled outward in unexpected ways. Local businesses, inspired by the anonymous act of kindness, began stepping up. The hardware store started a school supply drive. The corner bakery offered to provide fresh bread for the school cafeteria at cost. The local farmers market partnered with the school to provide fresh produce for the lunch program. One Tuesday evening, Linda sat in the school cafeteria, now transformed into a community space. Tables were filled with families attending a free nutrition workshop, part of the expanded program. Tommy was there too, proudly showing other kids how to make simple science experiments with kitchen ingredients. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he explained his cookie chemistry project. Rosa had set up her art in a corner, teaching younger children how to make beautiful pictures from recycled materials, just as she had done when they couldn't afford new supplies. Everyone has art inside them, she told a shy first grader. Sometimes you just need someone to help you find it. Alex, who no longer needed to skip meals, had started a peer support group. It's okay to ask for help, he told new students, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned this lesson the hard way. We're all in this together. The changes went beyond just food. Linda noticed subtle but significant shifts in the school atmosphere. Children who had once been quiet and withdrawn now participated eagerly in class discussions. Parents who had avoided school events due to financial stress now attended regularly. The invisible barriers that had separated families based on economic status began to dissolve. One mother, fighting back tears, told Linda how her daughter had finally joined the soccer team, something that had been impossible before due to equipment costs. Another shared how her son's grades had improved dramatically now that he could focus on learning instead of his growling stomach. The superintendent called a community meeting to discuss the program's success. The cafeteria was packed, filled with families whose lives had been touched by the initiative. Linda sat quietly in the back, watching as parent after parent stood to share their stories. My kids don't feel different anymore, one father said, his voice thick with emotion. They don't have to explain why they can't go on field trips or join after-school clubs. A grandmother spoke about her grandchildren finally being able to invite friends over for dinner, no longer ashamed of their empty kitchen. A single father described how he could now afford his son's medication because he wasn't choosing between pills and school lunches. The local business community continued to expand their support. A dental office offered free checkups for students. A tutoring center provided scholarships. What had started as one act of kindness had grown into a movement of community care and support. Linda's diner manager, moved by the changes he witnessed, started a job training program for high school students. Everyone deserves a chance, he said, remembering how hard Linda had worked to support her family. Even the school itself felt different. Teachers reported fewer behavioral issues, better attendance, and improved academic performance. The nurse noted a decrease in stress-related complaints. The counselor spoke about children being more open about their needs, no longer carrying the heavy burden of family financial struggles alone. One evening, as Linda walked through the school corridor after a community meeting, she paused by the cafeteria. Through the window, she could see children and parents gathered for a family dinner night. Another new program that had sprung from the original initiative. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Her phone buzzed with a text from the school coordinator. The anonymous donor called. They're doubling the program's funding for next year. More schools in the district want to join. Linda smiled, thinking of that afternoon in the diner that had started it all. She thought of Keanu's words about how sometimes the universe puts people in the right place at the right time. What had begun as a chance encounter had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that when people come together to help each other, extraordinary things can happen. As she walked home that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope. In her heart, she knew that this was just the beginning. The ripples of kindness would continue to spread, touching more lives, creating more changes, proving that sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments of human connection. 3 months had passed since that life-changing morning in the school conference room. The seasons had shifted from summer to fall, painting the trees outside Linda's apartment in brilliant shades of red and gold. But the changes in her family's life were even more colorful than the autumn leaves. Linda stood in her tiny kitchen, now well stocked with groceries, watching her children prepare for their day. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, catching the proud smile on Alex's face as he showed off his latest biology test, an A+ that seemed to glow on the paper. He no longer had to worry about an empty stomach distracting him during exams. "Mom, look what I made." Tommy burst into the kitchen, holding up a complex paper airplane design. "Mrs. Johnson says I can enter it in the science fair." His eyes sparkled with excitement, the same eyes that had once dimmed with disappointment every time Linda had to say no to school activities. Rosa trailed behind him, her arms full of art supplies, real ones now, not just scraps and recycled materials. "The art teacher wants to put my painting in the school showcase," she announced, her voice quiet but proud. "She says it shows real emotion." Linda felt her heart swell as she looked at her children, really looked at them. The changes were subtle but profound. Their clothes still weren't fancy, but they fit properly and weren't worn thin. Their faces were fuller, healthier. But the biggest change was in their eyes. The shadow of worry that had haunted them was gone, replaced by the light of possibility. That afternoon, Linda left work early, something she could do now that she didn't need 2 jobs to survive. The community center had asked her to help coordinate their new family support program. It wasn't a high-paying position, but it gave her the chance to help other families the way she had been helped. As she walked through the center's doors, she was greeted by familiar faces. Parents who had once been strangers now felt like family. They shared stories, strategies, and support. Today, they were planning a holiday meal program to ensure every family in the community would have a festive dinner. "You know what my daughter said this morning?" One mother shared during their meeting. She said she doesn't feel invisible anymore. She can raise her hand in class without worrying about drawing attention to our situation. Linda nodded, understanding perfectly. She thought about how Alex had joined the school's peer tutoring program, using his own experience to help other students. How Tommy had started a science club for younger kids, teaching them that curiosity didn't need expensive equipment. How Rosa's art now filled the school hallways, inspiring other students to express themselves. After the meeting, Linda drove to the local food bank where she now volunteered every week. The warehouse was busy with people sorting donations and preparing packages. She spotted Alex there too. He had started volunteering after school, saying he wanted to pay it forward. As they worked side by side, Alex spoke softly. "Mom, remember when you used to skip dinner saying you weren't hungry? I knew you were giving us your food." He paused, his hands steady as he packed cans into a box. "I'm glad we can help other families now." Linda blinked back tears, remembering those difficult days that felt both so recent and so far away. "Things change, honey," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "Sometimes in ways we never expect." That evening, their small apartment was filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of laughter. Tommy was at the kitchen table, surrounded by his science project materials. Rosa sat in the corner, sketching in her new art book. Alex was helping a neighbor's child with math homework, the same neighbor who had once helped them with hand-me-down clothes. As Linda stirred the pot of soup on the stove, a recipe she'd learned in the community cooking class, she thought about how their lives had transformed. It wasn't just about having enough food or being able to pay bills, though those changes were profound. It was about dignity restored, hope renewed, and the power of community. Her phone buzzed with a message from the school coordinator. Another district had reached out, wanting to implement a similar program. The ripple effect continued to spread, touching more families, creating more change. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Linda sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about Keanu, wondering if he knew how much his act of kindness had multiplied. She thought about all the other families whose lives had changed, all the children who no longer went to bed hungry, all the parents who could now sleep without the weight of worry crushing their dreams. On her small desk lay an acceptance letter from the local community college. She had finally enrolled in nursing classes, pursuing the dream she'd put aside years ago. Next to it was a drawing Rosa had made. A simple scene of their family, surrounded by a community of smiling faces, with the words, "We are all connected," written in her careful handwriting. Linda touched the drawing gently, thinking about how one moment of kindness in a diner had created waves of change that continued to ripple outward. She remembered Keanu's words about the universe putting people in the right place at the right time, about how sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of connection. As she got ready for bed, Linda paused to check on her sleeping children. In the quiet darkness, she whispered a thank you, not just to Keanu, but to everyone who had become part of their extended family, everyone who had helped turn a moment of kindness into a movement of change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to pass on the gift of hope they had received. But for now, in this peaceful moment, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: complete contentment and the certainty that no matter what came next, they would face it together, not just as a family, but as part of a community that had learned the true meaning of taking care of each other.